It's the most rewarding kind of photography that I can imagine. That the street's where the action is. That's where life is bubbling up, and that's where you got to be if you're going to catch it. Flaneur, he called it. Flaneur, the man of the crowd. It was in high school that I began to pick up an interest in photography. And it came through sort of a chance event. I was looking through a magazine in a store someplace, I don't remember now where, but they were advertising a little plastic camera for 39 cents. Well, at 10 cents an hour, I could save up enough to send away for that. And I just with that little camera, it started things rolling. I traded my dad's stamp collection, which he had given me, to hope that I would become interested in it, I guess, and he was no longer interested in it. But a friend of mine, buddy of mine at Cooley, waiting on the bus on the corner, I told him about this stamp collection, and he said he was very much interested in stamp collecting. And I said, well, I'm not interested at all. He said, well, you want to trade it? And I said, sure, what do you got? So he said, well, I got this camera that I got for Christmas, and I never use it, brand new. I said, well, bring it tomorrow. And it was an Argus camera, one of the first Argus cameras in 1936. It was put on the market. So we made the trade right there, and now I had a 35 millimeter camera that took film. Let me get this out of the way. I learned how to process film build up a dark room in my bedroom and build a sink up there. Not with running water, but I could, the sink was large enough to take 8 by 10 trays, and I would bring water from the bathroom, which was right next door, and so that worked out fine. And I actually made an enlarger with an Ovaltine can. The Ovaltine can is about 8 inches in diameter, and Ovaltine was a drink at the time. You'd put it in with milk. I never liked milk, so you get my mother to get me to drink milk would buy this Ovaltine, and it was about a foot and a half, or a foot, well, about 12, 14 inches high. And I would attach the camera at the bottom and put a piece of opal glass to sort of diffuse the light. And I couldn't focus it. It had a set focus, but I could make enlargements from the 35 millimeter size negative to about a 5 by 7 image on a print. In 1947, I had a business trip to New York, and I went to the Museum of Modern Art before coming home on Sunday night, and I ran into, just by chance, an exhibition of Cartier-Bresson, the very well-known and wonderful French photographer, and I was just absolutely struck dumb almost by the work that he was able to achieve that I saw on the walls, and I realized then, this is the kind of photography that I was looking for. And so from then on, I started working in the streets. Detroit did not have the lure and the excitement of Paris or Spain or North Africa, and I had to adjust my photography to suit Detroit. But they worked out real fine, because that's meant that I was able to spend almost 60 years, well over 60 years, photographing Detroit, and build up a pretty good backlog of photographs of Detroit during the very exciting times of Detroit. I think for me the 50s, the 1950s was one of the high points of the history of Detroit, as far as opportunity and living conditions, and it was just a wonderful place during the 50s. And I captured the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and into the 90s, the change that took place in Detroit. So it worked out real well for me. I remember the first Leica camera that I saw. There was a camera shop on Burwood and Grand River. Now this was about 3 miles away from Cooley High School where I went to school. But I loved to walk, and if it wasn't raining or snowing or 10 below zero, I would walk from Cooley to home. And I went past this camera shop, and he had a Leica sitting in the window. That's the first Leica I'd ever seen, and it was such a beautiful camera. And I had known Fred Eggert was his name, because I was buying film and stuff from him. So I went in and asked him to let me take a look at it, and so he did. But of course, it was way out of my price range. It was like $330 or something like that, and I know I couldn't get it, but I would walk home out of my way to go past the camera shop just to take a look at that Leica again. It was a great camera. It was a wonderful camera. And then finally, my first camera, my first Leica, was bought probably the first month after I was married. And I didn't have the cash. So I went downtown, contacted a loan shark, and made a loan with him, took a loan out with him, and bought the Leica camera for, I think, $200. And from then on, Leica was my camera. You know. This is the Kresge Court again, and I love the way that she, and that's Saunders. So, and I think that's the most sophisticated lady I've ever photographed. I mean, look at the graceful hand. In the 30s, the biggest challenge was getting money to buy film, because at 10 cents an hour, it wasn't so good. But when I got to a real job that paid $18 a week, which was pretty good. There was the first challenge, I guess, was how to photograph without being seen. I didn't want to take photographs of people who had stopped to let me photograph, or I didn't want to stop them to do this. It had to be sort of a candid approach. And that was a little tricky you sort of learned after a while who might be, in case they saw you. If they did see me before I shot, then I would ask them if I could photograph them if I thought it was important. But you learned, or I learned, I think every photographer does who shoots the street, you learn to sort of size people up, just sort of walk without being seen. And I don't know exactly how you do that. You just sort of learn how to do it. And I sort of formulated what I call the 3 iron rules of street photography. And it's different than shooting in a studio or landscape, because you have this moving target. But there are 3 of them, the laws that I set up. One was being there. You have to be there if you're going to get a shot. Being there is essential. And so you have to be out walking and getting in the crowd. And secondly is you have to be ready. You have to be ready to take the shot. Now that means not only, as far as I know, not only aperture and shutter speed and focus to do this, because you don't have time to do that. But you have to have, I think, which is even more important, is a huge, important background in everything. You have to be widely read, understand, because otherwise, if you don't recognize the significance of what's happening in front of the camera, and that comes from the background that you've acquired over, accumulated over the past years, you're going to miss it. You're not going to recognize the importance of it. And so you have to be ready in that sense. And then third, you have to be lucky. And then during the, well, from this early, this is the 60s, 70s, when the Vietnam War was in the newspaper and everything, I would get down there as often as I could, and I would walk in the parades. And I'd walk in the parades, but what I would take also, not only the paraders, but the people along the sidewalk. But this one was from a rally, as you can see. The idea was to see the situation and shoot it as you found it, not to organize it, not to set it up so that it made a different kind of story or maybe emphasized what you saw in it. It had to be, as far as I'm concerned, it had to be as I found it, and I didn't want the person that I was photographing or the group I was photographing to really recognize that I was doing what I was doing. That was something that I tried to avoid at all costs. They wanted to be artists. They wanted photography to be accepted as art. At this time, it was a hobby. That's what it was, at least in the Midwest. And there were very small groups of people in California and New York who treated it more as a work of art, but it really hadn't been accepted nationally or worldwide as a form of art. But they wanted to make it a work of art, so they would resort to all kinds of tricks in making it look like something besides a photograph. There are all kinds of processes that required replacing the silver image, which was what you got when you developed the film, to pigment. Gum bichromate process was one that was very popular. Anything to make it look like a painting or a drawing or a watercolor sketch or a charcoal drawing, something like that. And I was not into that at all. That was not what was part of my modus operandi. I wanted to keep the straight photograph, and I felt that the photograph, what made photography an art was the element that differed it from all the other arts, and that was that it took reality. It captured reality. And if you worked to change that reality, then you were destroying the one thing that made it an art form, as far as the different effect. Like I say, the difference that I liked about photography, and to me, that it made an art, was the difference between photography and all the others. It was the one thing it could do that the other arts could not do. No other art could make a photograph of reality as it was caught by the camera. The camera actually the camera was the central issue in my photography, was what the camera could take. And I never wanted to go beyond what the camera took and try to change it to look like something else, some other form of art. Baudelaire, Charles Baudelaire, the French poet and critic of the 18th, 19th century, had a term for it, flaneur, he called it. Flaneur, the man of the crowd. And he was the one who would encourage painters, instead of working in their studios, to get out in the crowd, make a sketch of what they saw, and then take it back, because photography wasn't possible to do at the time. So he encouraged them to make sketches, take them back into the studio, and then paint from those sketches. And he was a great fan of Daumier, who did that sort of thing, his third-class carriage people and of the streets. And because he seemed to think, and agree too, that the streets where the action is. That's where life is bubbling up, and that's where you got to be. You're going to catch it, and that's what the camera can do perfectly. No other art, no other medium can record that. Those moments that occur only in front of the camera, and it's a challenge. It's a real challenge, exciting challenge to be able to catch them. You know, and you curse yourself if you miss it. You know, you're stupid. What's the matter with me? But it's just something that I don't know. It it sounds silly, but it just gets into your blood, and you just have to do it. Well, you know, didn't you take? When did you take this? Where was it? You didn't get the people's name. Well, of course, didn't want people's name, but where it was and time of day and all this. I didn't have time to do that because when you're in a crowd, and that's the only way to photograph, you know, or wherever, you see the shot, you take it, and then you know there's something else happening, so you just forget about that and walk away and look for something else that's taking place. And so you don't have time to. I never made notes of where I was. I mean, I just was so involved in looking for something that was happening and that it would make a photograph. From the very beginning, photography was considered the term that was used in the 1830s, 1840s, and 50s, and on from that point on, was that it's too mechanical, and so that was something that took place until well, the latter part of the 19th century, when a man named Alfred Stieglitz began to think about photography as being best when left to do what it did only, which was capture reality. And the one thing that occurred to me, that over this time that photography was growing in acceptance and becoming recognized as a bona fide member of the art world, was when the Detroit Institute of Arts department changed its name from the Graphic Arts Department to the Department of Prints, Drawings, and Photographs. I knew at that point, okay, Detroit now has a legitimate claim to be a bona fide art form. I was constantly, in all my spare time, photographing. I was walking the streets photographing in spite of the fact that my job was in the engineering field. But once the opportunity came to leave that field and go into the field of education, I took it without questioning. I knew Bob Vigiletti, who was at the time the chair of the Department of Photography at Center for, it was called Arts and Crafts at the time. This was in 60, well, this was in, I'm sorry, 70, about 1970. I went to the Halstead Gallery to see a show and to meet and talk with Ansel Adams. And as I was going up the stairs to the gallery, he was coming out, and we talked a little bit. And he said, before we left, he said, "Oh, by the way, would you like to teach a course in history of photography?" I said, "I need somebody to teach that course. It's a night class, so you wouldn't have to quit your job." I said, "Yeah, I'd like to try it." So the next fall, I got into my first class, and I was there for 10 minutes, and I remember that moment. I said, this is what I gotta do. And so I did. You know, the next fall, he needed some full-time, and I was chief engineer at the time. And I said, he said, "Would you like to teach full-time?" I said, "Yeah, I would." So that was it. That made the change, and I was there for over 30 years teaching photography. Loved every minute of it. What keeps it fresh? Um, just the doing of it, um, walking the streets, looking for something. You see, that goes back to what I said earlier about being ready, and that means being constantly up on what is happening, uh, being well read, being interested in music, being interested in poetry. It's everything. It is something that lends to you the excitement of finding that kind of work in the streets. And I just love to walk and to be there, because you never knew. It was a magic moment when something occurred that you, wow, that's a great shot. You know, now I got to get it. Now I got to get it. And I just never got tired of it. Now, since the last 3 years, I've been doing totally digital work. I don't hate anything about it. I think that when I first came on, I was intrigued simply by the newness of it. But then I had a little digital camera and I started playing around with it. And then when I realized what the potential was, the cameras started becoming more complex, and I got a computer and I got into all of the whole thing. I could see that for me, this was a perfect way to take photographs, because there was firstly no limit to what you could do, and it was such a new, just the newness of it was exciting. But I don't know where to start. It was so different and so exciting and so different and so wonderfully flexible. I could concentrate more now on taking photographs. So right now I'm going through all of the negatives that I never printed, and there must be, my guess is in all I've got about 8,000 to 10,000 negatives, and that's not many. I was not one who would go out and just bang, 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 bang. I would wait until things were right. But I must have 8,000 or 10,000 negatives that I have never printed. And so I'm scanning those. And it's kind of interesting that I'm finding some that I rejected, 50 years ago. And I'm not sure whether I was wrong then or whether I'm wrong now. But it's kind of, it's a revelation to see some of these images that pretty much fit into what I'm doing right now. It's something I think you just have to want to do and understand why you want to do it. And I think that would be the first thing that I would tell this new person. Why do you want to do it? Why are you sure that's what you want to do? And then I've always said if I was going to set up a school for street photographers especially, I would have 1 year of how to use the camera and the equipment. The other 3 years would be learning how to read, understand, listen to music, get involved in all the other aspects of life, and know what that's all about, get the feel of it. Because that's what you're depending on. You're depending on how you respond and how you're going to respond, to recognize what you see that's significant and important. And that's what's exciting about it. It's the most rewarding kind of photography that I can imagine. But it's something you just have to know, this is what I've got to do. It isn't what you want to do, it's what you got to do.